What depths of devastation lie beneath the surface of seeming perfection? When does trust become a weapon and love transform into the cruelest form of betrayal? Tonight, we unravel the haunting story of Rylan Marshall, a woman whose world shattered with three letters that would forever alter her existence: HIV. Welcome to True Crime Stories Archive, your gateway to the chilling world of real-life horror. Here, we delve into the darkest corners of humanity, unearthing terrifying stories of true crime that will leave you sleeping with the lights on. Before we begin this haunting tale, take a moment to subscribe to our channel and join our community of true crime enthusiasts.
All right, so you guys wanted to really dig into this whole Raylan Marshall thing.
Yeah.
And it's a doozy. We've got court transcripts and investigative reports and even university course stuff that uses her case as an example.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so buckle up.
Yeah.
It gets pretty dark. We're talking about a seemingly perfect life.
Right.
Successful social worker in Atlanta, she had it all.
It seems like it, yeah.
But then boom, betrayal, shattered everything.
Wow.
So this deep dive,
Yeah.
it isn't just about what happened to her though.
All right.
It's about how corporations and systems failed her.
Yeah.
And then the ripple effect, right? How this case changed
Okay.
corporate practices and healthcare. It's a lot.
It's a story that really shows how these deep personal betrayals can get all mixed up with these big systemic issues.
Yeah.
And it leads to these reforms that we're still dealing with today.
So, okay, let's start at the beginning.
In the labyrinth of human deception, some betrayals cut so deep they tear through the very fabric of existence. For Rylan Marshall, that first devastating crack in her perfect life appeared on what should have been an ordinary morning. The sun painted golden streaks across her bedroom floor, casting shadows that seemed to whisper of the darkness lurking beneath her seemingly flawless marriage. Rylan embodied everything society celebrates in a human being. A dedicated social worker whose gentle touch had mended countless shattered lives, she approached each day with an unwavering belief in humanity's inherent goodness. Her colleagues spoke of her almost mystical ability to find light in the darkest situations, never suspecting she would soon face an abyss deeper than any they had encountered in their work. At 34, Rylan had carefully constructed what many would consider the perfect life. Her suburban home stood as a testament to the American dream, a sanctuary of peace with its pristine exterior and windows that gleamed with promise. Each morning, she would prepare for work with meticulous care, smoothing her professional attire while smiling at the reflection of a woman who appeared to have everything: a flourishing career, a devoted husband, and a future that sparkled with endless possibilities. Yet beneath this carefully polished veneer, an insidious storm was gathering force. The first signs manifested as subtle whispers: a bone-deep exhaustion that clung to her like morning mist, a persistent weakness that echoed through her typically vibrant days. Initially, she attributed these symptoms to the emotional demands of her career, believing them to be mere side effects of pouring herself into helping others navigate their darkest hours. As weeks melted into months, these subtle warnings began to multiply. Her body, once a reliable instrument of her compassionate work, started to betray her in ways she couldn't ignore. The fatigue deepened, transforming from a gentle weight into an overwhelming force that threatened to pull her under. Her usually healthy appetite waned, turning meals into mechanical exercises rather than moments of enjoyment. Even her favorite dishes lost their appeal, becoming bland shadows of former pleasures. Sleep, once a refuge, became an elusive companion that left her feeling more drained with each passing night. Her joints began to protest with mysterious aches, and a persistent headache took up residence at the base of her skull, a constant reminder that something within her carefully balanced world had shifted dramatically out of alignment. Throughout these changes, Rylan maintained her characteristic strength, carrying the burden of her deteriorating health with quiet dignity. She was, after all, someone who had built her life around being the pillar others leaned on. The thought of becoming vulnerable, of needing support herself, felt foreign to her very nature. In her mind, admitting weakness meant failing those who depended on her: her clients, her colleagues, and most importantly, her husband, Omari. Omari Marshall cut an impressive figure in their community. A corporate executive whose mere presence commanded attention, he had mastered the art of success in both his professional and social spheres. His carefully pressed suits and confident stride spoke of a man who had conquered the corporate ladder, while his charismatic smile could disarm even the most skeptical observer. To the outside world, he and Rylan represented the perfect power couple. She, the compassionate humanitarian, and he, the ambitious businessman. Their love story had begun 5 years earlier at a community fundraiser, where fate seemed to orchestrate their meeting with meticulous care. The event, hosted at an upscale hotel ballroom, had drawn Atlanta's most influential citizens together for an evening of philanthropy and networking. Rylan had attended out of genuine interest in the cause, a program supporting at-risk youth. Omari's presence, though officially for business networking, would later seem like destiny's careful planning. From their first interaction, there appeared to be an invisible thread drawing them together. Omari's confident demeanor balanced perfectly with Raylan's nurturing spirit. He spoke of his ambitions with a passion that matched her own dedication to social work. Their conversations flowed effortlessly, touching on everything from childhood dreams to future aspirations. In those early moments, neither could have predicted how their story would unfold, how the very qualities that drew them together would eventually tear them apart. As Raylan's health continued to decline, she found herself caught in an internal struggle. Her professional training urged her to seek medical attention, while her personal tendency to prioritize others' needs made her hesitate. The dichotomy of her situation wasn't lost on her. She spent her days counseling others to seek help, yet struggled to follow her own advice. The morning Rylan finally decided to seek medical help dawned with an unusual clarity. Standing before her bathroom mirror, she could no longer deny the ghostly pallor of her skin or the hollow shadows beneath her eyes. Her reflection had become a stranger, a pale echo of the vibrant woman she once was. This moment of brutal honesty became the catalyst that propelled her toward a truth she never could have imagined. The medical center she chose sat nestled among towering oak trees, its modern glass facade reflecting the morning sun like a beacon of hope. As Rylan navigated the sterile corridors, her heels clicking against polished floors, she rehearsed what she would tell the doctor. Each symptom, carefully catalogued in her mind, seemed to whisper of ordinary explanations: stress, overwork, perhaps a vitamin deficiency. Even then, her optimistic nature sought the simplest solutions. The examination room's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows as Dr. Sarah Chun, a middle-aged physician with kind eyes and steady hands, listened to Raylan's carefully constructed narrative. The doctor's expression remained neutral, professional, as she ordered a comprehensive panel of blood tests. Her pen scratched against paper with methodical precision, each mark another step toward an unimaginable revelation. Days stretched into an eternity as Rylan waited for results. She threw herself into her work with renewed vigor, as if keeping busy could somehow ward off the growing sense of unease that had taken root in her chest. Her cases at the social services department provided a welcome distraction, other people's problems temporarily overshadowing her own mounting anxiety. When the call came requesting her return to the clinic, something in the receptionist's tone sent a chill down Raylan's spine. The carefully measured words, the gentle insistence that she come as soon as possible, these subtle signals triggered warning bells in her mind, though she tried desperately to silence them. The return visit to the clinic felt different. The same corridors she had walked days before now seemed longer, more ominous. The waiting room's gentle music felt discordant, its attempted soothing effect serving only to heighten her anxiety. When Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway, her face carried the weight of news that would shatter Raylan's world into countless irreparable pieces. Time seemed to stop as the doctor delivered the diagnosis. The words HIV positive hung in the air like toxic smoke, choking out all other thoughts, all other realities. Rylan sat motionless, her mind refusing to process the information, her body frozen in a moment of absolute disbelief. The room's white walls began to spin, the doctor's voice fading into a distant hum as the magnitude of this revelation crashed over her like a tidal wave. The drive home from the clinic became a blur of conflicting emotions, denial battling with stark reality, confusion wrestling with a growing sense of betrayal. Raylan's hands gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white, her mind racing through every possibility, every explanation that could make sense of this devastating diagnosis. The cityscape passed by unnoticed, traffic lights blending into a kaleidoscope of colors that matched her tumultuous thoughts. In the days that followed, Rylan moved through her life like a ghost, going through the motions while her mind constantly circled back to one devastating question: how? She had been faithful, devoted, committed to her marriage in every possible way. The only logical conclusion was too painful to contemplate, yet it persistently scratched at the edges of her consciousness. Determined to prove the first test wrong, Rylan visited different medical facilities, each time hoping for a different result. The second clinic, a modern facility in downtown Atlanta, delivered the same verdict. A third opinion from a renowned medical center only confirmed what she desperately wanted to deny. Each positive result drove the nail of reality deeper into her heart, forcing her to confront the unthinkable truth about her marriage. The weight of these revelations transformed her home into an alien landscape. Every shared photograph on the walls, every piece of furniture they had chosen together, became evidence of a life built on quicksand. The bedroom she shared with Omari felt contaminated, tainted by secrets she was only beginning to uncover. Even the morning coffee ritual they had once shared became a bitter reminder of intimacy corrupted. Nights became an endless parade of sleepless hours. Rylan would lie awake, studying Omari's sleeping form beside her, searching for signs of the stranger he must be. How could someone sleep so peacefully while carrying such devastating secrets? The steady rise and fall of his chest, once a source of comfort, now felt like a mockery of her trust. During these dark hours, memories of their life together began to take on new, sinister meanings. Business trips that had run longer than expected, late-night meetings that couldn't be rescheduled, subtle changes in his behavior that she had attributed to work stress. All these moments now appeared as pieces of a darker puzzle, one that revealed a picture she had never wanted to see. Raylan's professional training as a social worker, once a source of strength, became a double-edged sword. Her understanding of human behavior and pattern recognition, skills honed through years of helping others, now turned inward, forcing her to analyze every aspect of her marriage with clinical precision. The evidence she found made her stomach churn. As suspicion took root in Raylan's mind, her investigative instincts awakened with a fierce intensity. Her years as a social worker had taught her to observe, to piece together fragments of truth from subtle behavioral changes. Now, those skills turned toward her own life, transforming her home into a crime scene where every detail demanded scrutiny. The transformation in Rylan was profound. The warm, trusting woman who had always given others the benefit of doubt became a meticulous observer, cataloging every inconsistency in Omari's behavior. She began to notice patterns she had previously overlooked. The way he positioned his phone screen away from her view, how he stepped outside for certain calls, the slight tension in his shoulders when work conversations arose. Her investigation started small, almost unconsciously. She found herself paying attention to the hours he kept, noting discrepancies between his stated schedule and actual arrivals. The occasional late meetings began to form a pattern. Tuesday evenings consistently ran long. Thursday appointments regularly extended beyond normal business hours. Each deviation from routine became another, in an increasingly troubling constellation of deceit. Technology became both her ally and her tormentor. The shared calendar they had once used to coordinate their lives now served as a record of inconsistencies. Business dinners that left no trace on credit card statements, meetings that couldn't be verified through his office. Each discovery felt like another crack in the foundation of their marriage. The corporate world Omari inhabited had always been somewhat foreign to Rylan. Its politics and power plays existed in sharp contrast to her world of social work and community service. Now, she began to study his professional life with renewed interest, paying particular attention to the names that repeatedly surfaced in his conversations. One name stood out above others: Cameron Lattimore, Omari's boss, whose mention always seemed to bring a subtle change to her husband's demeanor. Cameron Lattimore's presence in their lives had always been peripheral yet significant. A powerful figure in Atlanta's corporate landscape, his influence over Omari's career was undeniable. Rylan had met him at company functions, a commanding presence with steel-gray hair and calculating eyes that seemed to assess everything they fell upon. She remembered how Omari's behavior shifted in his presence, a mixture of deference and something else she couldn't quite name at the time. As weeks passed, Raylan's suspicions crystallized around Cameron. The way Omari spoke of him had always carried an undercurrent of something more than professional respect. Their late-night strategy sessions, the weekend corporate retreats, the private meetings to discuss sensitive business matters, all began to take on new meaning in light of her devastating diagnosis. The moment of undeniable truth arrived on a rain-soaked evening when the house felt particularly empty and silent. Rylan had spent hours wrestling with her conscience, the weight of suspicion finally outweighing her lifelong commitment to respecting privacy. Her hands trembled as she navigated through Omari's carelessly unlocked phone, each swipe feeling like a betrayal of her own principles, yet driven by a desperate need to uncover the truth that had poisoned her life. The evidence lay buried in his WhatsApp messages, hidden beneath a deceptively casual contact name, Sugar. The profile picture stopped her heart mid-beat, Cameron Lattimore's distinguished features staring back at her through the screen. As she scrolled through the messages, each word carved deeper wounds into her soul. The exchanges between Omari and Cameron painted a vivid picture of a relationship that transcended professional boundaries, filled with intimate promises, secret meetings, and desires that made her stomach churn. The messages revealed a double life orchestrated with calculated precision. Tuesday evening strategy sessions transformed into passionate encounters in upscale hotel rooms. Thursday client meetings became intimate dinners in secluded restaurants. The betrayal extended beyond the physical. There was an emotional intimacy in their exchanges that felt like a knife twisting in her heart. Omari shared thoughts, fears, and desires with Cameron that he had never revealed to her. More devastating than the affair itself was the cavalier attitude toward her health. Messages referring to that little problem and necessary precautions suggested both men knew about the risk they were taking. They had gambled not just with their own health, but with hers, treating her life as collateral damage in their pursuit of forbidden pleasure. The phone's soft glow illuminated tears she hadn't realized were falling. Images of intimate moments, suggestive conversations, and plans for future encounters blurred before her eyes. Their exchanges spoke of a connection that had developed over months, perhaps years, right under her nose while she remained blind to the destruction brewing in her own home. With trembling fingers, she documented everything, forwarding crucial messages to her own phone, saving screenshots of damning conversations. Each piece of evidence felt like another nail in the coffin of her marriage, another confirmation that the life she had built was founded on quicksand. The most gut-wrenching discovery came in the form of medical discussions between them. Cameron and Omari had known about the HIV diagnosis for months before her own discovery. They had discussed treatments, medications, and ways to keep their condition hidden, all while Omari continued to share her bed, knowing the devastating risk he was exposing her to. The revelations sent Rylan spiraling into a void of despair and rage deeper than anything she had ever experienced. Her world, once painted in vibrant colors of trust and love, now darkened to shades of betrayal and deceit. The walls of her home, which had witnessed countless moments of shared joy, now seemed to mock her with memories of a happiness built on lies. During sleepless nights, she found herself wandering through their house like a ghost, touching photographs that now felt like artifacts from a life that never truly existed. Each image of their smiling faces became a testament to Omari's skill at deception. How many of those captured moments had been immediately followed by secret messages to Cameron? How many times had he left their bed to connect with his lover while she slept, blissfully unaware of the betrayal unfolding beside her? The discovery in Omari's work locker dealt the final devastating blow. Hidden among his personal belongings, she found the small bottle of antiretroviral medication, tangible proof that he had known about his condition while deliberately keeping her in the dark. The prescription date revealed months of calculated deception, months during which he had consciously risked her life to protect his secret affair. Her professional training as a social worker, which had taught her to maintain composure in the face of human tragedy, began to crack under the weight of personal devastation. The skills she had used to help others process trauma now seemed useless in the face of her own. She found herself examining her reflection in mirrors throughout their home, searching for signs of the disease that now lived within her, wondering how many years of health Omari's selfishness had stolen from her future. The anger that grew within her was unlike anything she had experienced before. It wasn't the hot, explosive rage that burns quickly and fades, but rather a cold, calculating fury that settled into her bones and grew stronger with each passing day. Every morning she watched Omari prepare for work, straightening his tie in the mirror, checking his phone with practiced casualness, each action now revealed as part of an elaborate performance designed to maintain his carefully constructed facade. Their shared meals became exercises in silent warfare. While Omari attempted to maintain normal conversations about work and daily life, Rylan watched him with new eyes, noting every slight gesture, every glance at his phone, every casual mention of meetings or late nights at the office. Each word from his mouth now carried the weight of potential lies, each action scrutinized for hidden meanings. The power dynamic in their relationship shifted dramatically, though Omari remained unaware. While he continued his performance of devoted husband, Rylan was methodically documenting every aspect of his deception. She became a silent observer in her own marriage, watching as he wove himself deeper into a web of lies that would ultimately lead to his undoing. The weight of her discoveries expanded within her chest like a poisonous bloom, its toxic tendrils wrapping around every breath, every heartbeat. Each passing day brought new revelations as she pieced together the elaborate tapestry of deception that had become her marriage. The comfortable suburban home they shared transformed into a stage where she watched Omari perform his daily routines with a newfound awareness of their artificiality. Her mind became a battlefield of competing emotions. The social worker in her, trained to understand human behavior and facilitate healing, wrestled with the wounded woman who had been betrayed at the deepest level possible. She found herself analyzing every interaction they'd had over the years, recontextualizing countless moments through the lens of his deception. Simple memories, anniversary dinners, weekend getaways, quiet evenings at home, became tainted with questions about where his thoughts had truly been, whether he had been messaging Cameron during their intimate moments. The gun in their bedside drawer, a security measure Omari had insisted upon years ago, began to take on new significance in her thoughts. Its presence, once a source of protection, now represented a different kind of power. The power to end the pain, to stop the endless cycle of lies, to make him understand the depth of devastation he had caused. She found herself opening the drawer at night, running her fingers along the cold metal, feeling its weight in her hands while Omari slept peacefully beside her, unaware of the storm brewing in his wife's heart. The facade of normalcy she maintained became increasingly difficult to sustain. Each morning she watched him dress for work, noting how he spent extra time selecting his suits, knowing now they were chosen to impress someone else's eyes. His cologne, once a comforting scent that reminded her of love, now filled her nostrils with the stench of betrayal. Every business call taken in another room, every late meeting, every weekend conference, all of it formed part of an elaborate dance of deception she could no longer ignore. Her preparation for confrontation became methodical, almost ritual. She gathered evidence like a prosecutor building an airtight case, screenshots of messages, dates of prescriptions, patterns of behavior documented with clinical precision. The social worker's notepad, usually filled with client observations, now contained a detailed chronicle of her husband's duplicity. Each entry represented another crack in the foundation of their marriage, another reason for the fury that grew stronger with each passing day. The decision to end the charade crystallized one evening as she watched him return home, his shirt collar slightly askew, the ghost of another man's touch lingering in his demeanor. The familiar way he kissed her cheek, asked about her day, all while carrying secrets that were destroying her from within. It became unbearable. The time had come to shatter the carefully constructed illusion of their marriage. In the dimly lit living room that had witnessed countless moments of their shared life, Rylan positioned herself like a judge preparing to deliver a verdict. The evidence lay spread before her, medical reports, screenshots, the damning bottle of medication. Each item represented a different facet of Omari's betrayal, arranged with the precise attention to detail that marked her professional life. The sound of his key in the door sent electricity through her veins. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her exterior remained calm, the stillness of a predator waiting to strike. Omari entered with his usual confidence, his expensive suit and perfectly knotted tie a costume in the performance of successful businessman and devoted husband. The moment he saw her sitting there, surrounded by the physical proof of his deception, his step faltered almost imperceptibly. The air in the room grew thick with unspoken accusations. Rylan watched as his eyes darted from the papers on the coffee table to her face, noting how quickly his expression shifted from confusion to recognition to carefully constructed innocence. The practiced smile he attempted died under the weight of her unwavering gaze. She began not with accusations but with facts, clinical, undeniable facts. Her HIV diagnosis, the dates of his prescriptions, the timeline of his affair with Cameron. Her voice remained steady, each word precisely chosen and delivered with the kind of detachment she had learned to use when presenting difficult cases to her supervisors. But beneath this professional veneer, a storm of emotions raged. As she spoke, she observed every micro-expression that crossed his face, the slight tightening of his jaw, the almost imperceptible shift in his stance, the way his fingers twitched toward the phone in his pocket. His attempts to interrupt, to explain, to minimize were met with a silence that demanded truth. The facade of the successful corporate executive began to crack under the weight of exposed lies. His initial denials transformed into defensive justifications. The manipulation that had served him so well in the boardroom proved useless against the mountain of evidence she had accumulated. Each attempt to twist the narrative was met with another document, another screenshot, another piece of irrefutable proof. His reaction to being cornered revealed a side of him she had never seen, or perhaps had chosen not to see. The charm that had once won her heart turned to cold calculation. The warmth in his eyes disappeared, replaced by something harder, more dangerous. As his carefully constructed world began to crumble, the true Omari emerged. A man capable of risking his wife's life to protect his secrets. His attempts to maintain control of the situation revealed the depth of his narcissism. Rather than showing remorse for endangering her life, he focused on protecting his reputation. His words dripped with self-preservation as he attempted to paint himself as the victim of circumstance, trapped between societal expectations and personal desires. Each justification he offered only served to fuel the ice-cold rage growing within Rylan. The transformation in his demeanor was profound. Gone was the caring husband who had once held her through difficult times. In his place stood a stranger, calculating and cruel, whose primary concern was damage control. He spoke of his position at the company, of the need for discretion, of how she needed to understand the complexities of his situation, as if his career aspirations somehow justified gambling with her life. His relationship with Cameron emerged in fragments, each revelation more devastating than the last. The affair hadn't been a momentary lapse in judgment, but a calculated long-term deception. Every business trip, every late-night meeting, every weekend conference had been carefully orchestrated opportunities for their encounters. The sophisticated planning behind their deception made it clear that neither man had given any thought to the devastating consequences their actions would have on her life. The most chilling aspect was his dismissal of her health concerns. He spoke of HIV as if it were a minor inconvenience, something that modern medicine could manage. His casual attitude toward permanently altering her medical future, forcing her into a lifetime of medications and monitoring, revealed a level of callousness that shattered any remaining illusion of the man she thought she had married. As the confrontation escalated, the physical space between them became charged with dangerous energy. Rylan could feel decades of social worker training warring with primal instincts of rage and betrayal. Her professional experience had taught her to recognize dangerous situations, to de-escalate tensions, to find peaceful resolutions. But this was different. This wasn't a client's crisis to manage. This was her life, her health, her future that had been deliberately destroyed by the person who had vowed to protect her. The gun in the drawer seemed to pulse with possibility, its presence a constant whisper in the back of her mind. Each dismissive word from Omari, each attempt to minimize his actions, each subtle suggestion that she was overreacting pushed her closer to an edge she had never thought she would approach. The weight of betrayal, the years of lies, the calculated risk to her health, it all began to compress into a singular point of devastating clarity. The room's atmosphere grew heavier with each passing moment, charged with an electric tension that made the air itself feel toxic. Omari's continued attempts to justify his actions, to diminish the gravity of his betrayal, became a twisted symphony of excuses that echoed off the walls of their once peaceful home. His voice, once a source of comfort, now grated against her consciousness like shards of broken glass. Each word he spoke revealed more about the stranger he truly was. He talked about his position at the company as if corporate success justified destroying her health. He spoke of Cameron with a reverence that made her stomach turn, describing their connection as something deep and meaningful, completely dismissing the fact that their meaningful relationship had sentenced her to a lifetime of medical complications. The breaking point came when he had the audacity to suggest that she should be grateful for the lifestyle his job had provided, as if material comfort somehow compensated for his betrayal. His expensive watch caught the light as he gestured dismissively, the same watch she now realized had been a gift from Cameron. Every symbol of their supposed success became another reminder of the elaborate fraud their marriage had been. Time seemed to slow as Rylan moved toward the drawer where the gun lay waiting. Her steps felt both deliberate and dreamlike, as if she were watching herself from outside her body. The weight of every betrayal, every lie, every calculated risk to her health pressed down on her, guiding her hand toward the cold metal that promised an end to her pain. Omari's expression shifted from dismissive to concerned as he watched her movements, but even then, His concern seemed more focused on himself than on her emotional state. He began to speak faster, his words tumbling over each other as he realized the situation was spiraling beyond his ability to manipulate it. The polished corporate executive facade cracked completely, revealing the coward beneath. The gun felt heavy in her hands, its weight matching the burden of betrayal she had carried since discovering his deception. Years of handling critical situations as a social worker had taught her to recognize the point of no return. She had talked countless others back from the edge of devastating decisions, but now she found herself stepping deliberately toward that very precipice. In that moment, every memory of their life together flashed through her mind. Their first meeting, their wedding day, quiet mornings sharing coffee, each one now tainted by the knowledge that he had been living a lie. The future they had planned together, the children they had talked about having, all of it had been built on a foundation of deception, so profound it had literally poisoned her body. The final fragments of their shared life shattered as Omari made one last attempt to regain control of the situation. His voice, now tinged with genuine fear, tried to remind her of their history together, of the good times they had shared. But his words rang hollow in the space between them, each syllable another reminder of how expertly he had crafted his deceptions. Everything narrowed to a single point of focus, the way his chest rose and fell with quickened breaths, the subtle tremor in his hands as he realized the gravity of the moment, the look in his eyes as understanding finally dawned. This wasn't a business negotiation he could charm his way through. This wasn't a situation his corporate influence could control. The sound of the gunshot shattered the evening silence, reverberating through the house like a thunderclap. The mechanical click of the trigger, the explosive percussion that followed, the acrid smell of gunpowder. Each sensation burned itself into Raylan's memory with crystal clarity. Time seemed to freeze as she watched Omari's expression transform from fear to disbelief to vacant emptiness. His body crumpled with an almost elegant finality, the expensive suit he had worn to impress Cameron now stained with spreading darkness. The man who had orchestrated such elaborate deceptions, who had played with her life as if it were a disposable commodity, lay still on the floor of the home they had once shared with such hope. The aftermath arrived in waves of reality. The gun slipped from her fingers, clattering against the hardwood floors she had once chosen with such care. The sound of it falling seemed to echo endlessly, marking the moment her life divided into before and after. The room's silence pressed against her eardrums, broken only by the distant sound of a neighbor's dog barking, the mundane world continuing unchanged beyond their walls. Her social worker's training kicked in automatically, her hands reaching for her phone to dial 911 with the same professional composure she had used countless times to help clients in crisis. Her voice sounded foreign to her own ears as she reported what had happened, each word precise and measured, as if she were describing someone else's tragedy. The minutes that followed stretched like hours. She sat in their living room, surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal, watching the growing stain on their imported carpet, another expensive item he had insisted upon, probably to impress Cameron during his visits. The irony of it struck her with almost hysterical clarity. The flash of red and blue lights began to paint abstract patterns on their living room walls, transforming their upscale home into a garish crime scene. The sounds of sirens, car doors slamming, and the crunch of boots on their perfectly manicured lawn created a surreal symphony that marked the end of her life as she knew it. Police officers moved through their home with practiced efficiency, their voices clipped and professional as they secured the scene. Their presence seemed to strip away every vestige of the life she and Omari had built together. Each room they entered became foreign territory, no longer the intimate spaces of shared memories, but sterile areas to be photographed, measured, and documented. The detective who took her initial statement was a woman named Martinez, with eyes that had seen too many domestic tragedies and a voice that managed to be both firm and gentle. As Rylan recounted the events that had led to this moment, the diagnosis, the discovery of betrayal, the confrontation, she noticed how the detective's expression shifted subtly, revealing glimpses of understanding beneath her professional demeanor. Crime scene technicians moved through the space like methodical ghosts, capturing every detail of the destruction that had erupted in her perfectly maintained home. They photographed the scattered evidence of Omari's duplicity, the medical records, the screenshots, the prescription bottle that had sealed his fate. Each flash of their cameras felt like another moment of her private pain being exposed to the world. The questions came in waves, from uniformed officers, detectives, crime scene investigators. Each one required her to relive the moment, to explain how years of trust had unraveled, how love had transformed into an act of violence. She answered with a detachment that surprised her, as if she were discussing one of her case files rather than the implosion of her own life. News of the shooting traveled through their affluent neighborhood with lightning speed. Through the windows, she could see neighbors gathering on their manicured lawns, their faces illuminated by emergency lights as they whispered among themselves. The perfect couple's perfect life had just provided them with the ultimate piece of gossip. The most surreal moment came when they led her out in handcuffs. The cool metal against her wrists felt like the final punctuation mark on her previous life. As they guided her toward the waiting police car, she caught glimpses of familiar faces watching from behind curtained windows. The same neighbors who had smiled and waved at their summer barbecues now viewed her with a mixture of horror and fascination. The fluorescent lights of the police station cast harsh shadows as they processed her, transforming her from Rylan Marshall, respected social worker, into inmate number 247891. The booking procedures stripped away every vestige of her former life. Her professional clothes exchanged for an orange jumpsuit, her carefully maintained appearance reduced to a mugshot, her identity condensed to fingerprints and basic biographical data. The holding cell's cold concrete bench offered her first moment of genuine solitude since the shooting. The reality of her actions began to settle over her like a heavy shroud. The distant sounds of the police station, phones ringing, officers talking, doors closing, created a surreal soundtrack to her new reality. Her mind kept returning to the moment of the shooting, replaying it in endless loops, each iteration bringing new waves of emotion. News of the incident spread through Atlanta's social circles with voracious speed. The story had all the elements of a sensational tragedy: a respected social worker, a prominent executive, a secret affair with another man, HIV transmission, and a fatal confrontation. Local news outlets seized upon the story, their headlines growing more sensational with each passing hour. Her first meeting with the court-appointed attorney, Sarah Davidson, took place in a stark consultation room. Davidson, a veteran of the public defender's office with tired eyes and a determined set to her jaw, listened intently as Rylan recounted every detail of her marriage's dissolution. The lawyer's expression remained neutral, but her rapid note-taking revealed the complexity of the case they would need to build. The investigation uncovered layers of deception that even Rylan hadn't known about. Financial records revealed elaborate systems Omari had created to conceal his relationship with Cameron. Hotel receipts, gift purchases, private weekend getaways, all carefully disguised as business expenses. The depth of his deception proved even more extensive than she had imagined. Cameron Lattimore's involvement became a focal point of media attention. The powerful executive initially attempted to distance himself from the scandal, issuing carefully worded statements through his corporate legal team. But evidence continued to emerge: text messages, emails, witness accounts, each new revelation adding another layer to the story of betrayal and deception. The prosecution began building their case, focusing on the premeditated aspects of her actions. They pointed to her background as a social worker, arguing that her professional training made her more culpable, not less. Her methodical gathering of evidence, they claimed, showed planning and intent rather than a crime of passion. The preparations for trial transformed Raylan's life into a meticulous examination of every choice, every action, every moment that had led to that fatal night. Her defense team, expanded now to include a psychologist specializing in trauma response, worked to construct a narrative that would help the jury understand the devastating psychological impact of Omari's betrayal. Media coverage intensified as more details emerged about Cameron Lattimore's relationship with Omari. Corporate Atlanta buzzed with whispers and speculation as other executives distanced themselves from the scandal. Cameron's carefully crafted public image began to crumble as former employees came forward with stories of similar relationships, painting a picture of a predatory pattern that had been an open secret in certain circles. The district attorney's office pursued the case with particular vigor, perhaps motivated by the high-profile nature of the victims and the media attention it garnered. They portrayed Rylan as a calculating killer who had chosen revenge over legal recourse, emphasizing how she had documented evidence instead of immediately confronting her husband or seeking legal intervention. Inside her jail cell, Rylan watched as her story became public property, dissected and analyzed by strangers who knew nothing of the intimate pain that had driven her actions. Television pundits debated the moral implications of her choice. Social media exploded with hashtags both supporting and condemning her, and true crime enthusiasts began crafting their own theories about the case. The most painful aspect was watching her professional reputation, built over years of dedicated service to others, crumble under public scrutiny. Former colleagues were interviewed, their carefully worded statements revealing the awkward position they found themselves in, trying to reconcile the compassionate social worker they had known with the woman who had taken her husband's life. Her parents, retired school teachers from South Carolina, mortgaged their home to contribute to her defense fund. Their weekly visits became anchors in the stormy sea of her new reality. Her mother's eyes, filled with a mixture of love and incomprehension, searched her face for traces of the daughter she had raised. Her father, always the steady one, sat in silence, his weathered hands clasped tightly as if holding onto the last threads of their family's normalcy. The discovery phase of the trial revealed even darker aspects of Omari's deception. Financial investigations uncovered a complex web of accounts and transactions suggesting that his relationship with Cameron had influenced corporate decisions, raising questions about possible securities violations and insider trading. The courthouse steps became a daily spectacle as the trial began, with media crews, protesters, and curious onlookers gathering each morning. Some carried signs supporting Rylin, painting her as a victim of unconscionable betrayal, while others condemned her actions, demanding maximum punishment. The intersection of HIV stigma, infidelity, corporate corruption, and deadly violence had transformed her personal tragedy into a cultural flashpoint. Inside the courtroom, Rylin sat at the defense table, her orange jumpsuit replaced with a modest navy suit that seemed to hang loosely on her frame, evidence of the toll months in custody had taken. The wooden barrier between her and the spectators felt like an inadequate shield against the weight of their judgment and curiosity. District Attorney Marcus Reynolds opened the state's case with a masterful performance, his voice resonating through the hushed courtroom as he painted a picture of calculated revenge. He described Rylin as a woman who had chosen murder over divorce, who had allowed her desire for vengeance to override her professional training and moral compass. His words were carefully chosen to strip away any sympathy the jury might feel, focusing instead on the deliberate nature of her actions. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reynolds intoned, his presence commanding complete attention, "this is not a case about betrayal or illness. This is a case about premeditated murder." The defendant, a trained professional who spent years helping others navigate crisis, chose to become judge, jury, and executioner. She had options. She had resources. She had legal recourse. Instead, she chose to end a man's life. The prosecution's timeline was damning in its precision. They mapped out the weeks between her diagnosis and the shooting, highlighting every moment she had chosen documentation over confrontation, evidence gathering over legal action. They portrayed her methodical approach not as the response of a traumatized woman, but as the calculated planning of someone intent on revenge. Evidence photos flashed across the courtroom screens, the pristine living room transformed into a crime scene, the scattered documents that had precipitated the confrontation, the gun lying where it had fallen. Each image seemed to draw fresh gasps from the spectators, the clinical detail of police photography lending a stark reality to the violent end of what had appeared to be a perfect marriage. The most powerful moment came when they played the 911 call. Raylan's composed voice filled the courtroom, her professional training evident in the clear, detailed report she provided to the dispatcher. The prosecution argued that this composure demonstrated not shock or trauma, but the calculated nature of her actions. The defense's opening statement, delivered by Sarah Davidson, took a markedly different approach. Her voice carried a quiet intensity as she wove together the threads of a story about betrayal so profound it shattered not just a marriage, but a woman's entire sense of reality and security. "Before you sits a woman who dedicated her life to helping others navigate trauma," Davidson began, her words measured and deliberate. "What you'll hear over the coming weeks is the story of how that same woman faced a betrayal so devastating, so life-altering, that it destroyed not just her marriage, but her health, her future, and her fundamental trust in human decency." The defense team meticulously constructed a timeline of their own, documenting the gradual erosion of Raylan's world. They introduced medical experts who explained the life-altering implications of HIV diagnosis, emphasizing how Omari's deliberate concealment of his condition had robbed Rylan of crucial early treatment options. The testimony painted a picture of not just emotional betrayal, but calculated physical endangerment. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a prominent infectious disease specialist, provided compelling testimony about the psychological impact of HIV diagnosis. She explained how the stigma, the lifetime of medical management, and the fundamental violation of trust can create profound trauma. Her clinical description of the virus's impact on the body was juxtaposed against the emotional devastation of discovering such a diagnosis through betrayal rather than honest disclosure. The corporate dimension of the case unfolded through testimony from former colleagues and employees. Their statements revealed a culture of silence and complicity that had enabled Omari and Cameron's relationship to flourish while putting others at risk. Junior executives described a pattern of behavior where professional advancement often hinged on personal compliance with unspoken rules and silent agreements. Perhaps the most devastating testimony came from Jessica Chen, a former executive assistant who had worked closely with both Omari and Cameron. Her voice trembled as she described the elaborate system of coded calendar entries, private meeting arrangements, and expense report manipulations she had been required to manage. Her testimony revealed not just an affair, but a calculated conspiracy of deception that had consumed company resources and compromised corporate integrity. The defense also brought forward a forensic accountant who had traced the labyrinth of financial transactions between Omari and Cameron. The evidence revealed a pattern of expensive gifts, hidden payments, and luxury accommodations, all carefully concealed within legitimate business expenses. Each revelation added another layer to the picture of systematic deception that had characterized Omari's double life. As the trial progressed, the prosecution's aggressive cross-examinations attempted to dismantle the defense's narrative of trauma and justified rage. Their questioning of Dr. Rodriguez became particularly heated as they tried to establish that many people face devastating medical diagnoses without resorting to violence. The prosecutor's pointed questions seemed designed to strip away the layers of sympathy the defense had carefully built. The testimony of Dr. Marcus Bennett, a forensic psychiatrist who had evaluated Rylan, brought the courtroom to a hushed silence. He detailed the psychological phenomenon known as betrayal trauma, explaining how the discovery of such profound deception from a trusted partner can shatter a person's entire framework of reality. His clinical analysis of Raylan's mental state in the weeks leading up to the shooting painted a picture of a woman trapped in an escalating crisis of identity and trust. "What we see here," Dr. Bennett explained, his academic tone lending weight to his words, is not just the normal response to infidelity. This case involves a calculated betrayal that literally endangered the victim's life. The psychological impact of discovering that your spouse has knowingly exposed you to a life-altering virus while maintaining an elaborate deception involving their employer creates a perfect storm of trauma. The prosecution's star witness, Cameron Lattimore, took the stand with the practiced confidence of a man accustomed to controlling narratives. His testimony, however, began to unravel under the defense's methodical questioning. His attempts to distance himself from responsibility collapsed as evidence mounted of his active role in concealing Omari's condition and maintaining their deception. Former clients from Raylan's social work practice provided character testimony that brought many in the courtroom to tears. They described a woman who had gone above and beyond to help others navigate crisis, who had shown extraordinary compassion and dedication to protecting the vulnerable. Their stories created a stark contrast with the prosecution's portrayal of a calculating killer. The most damaging testimony for the prosecution came from Dr. Sarah Williams, Omari's primary physician. Though initially reluctant to testify, she revealed that Omari had repeatedly refused her urgent recommendations to inform his wife of his HIV status. Medical records showed multiple documented instances where he had dismissed concerns about transmission risk, prioritizing the secrecy of his relationship with Cameron over his wife's health. Each day of testimony seemed to reveal new layers of deception. Corporate emails, security footage from hotels, credit card statements, piece by piece, they assembled a portrait of a marriage built on quicksand. The evidence showed how Omari had crafted an elaborate facade of devotion while systematically prioritizing his relationship with Cameron over his wife's well-being. The most gut-wrenching moment of the trial came when the prosecution introduced evidence from Omari's private journal, discovered in his office safe. The entries revealed a man who viewed his marriage as nothing more than a convenient cover for his true desires. His clinical descriptions of maintaining appearances while pursuing his relationship with Cameron exposed a level of calculated deception that left even veteran courtroom observers shaken. Rylan sat through each revelation with an almost eerie composure, though those closest to her could see the slight trembling of her hands, the way she pressed her lips together to maintain control when particularly painful details emerged. Her parents, faithful attendees throughout the trial, visibly aged with each new disclosure about their former son-in-law's duplicity. The defense team's presentation of Raylan's medical records after her diagnosis painted a harrowing picture of the physical toll Omari's betrayal had taken. Blood work results, medication adjustments, and clinical notes documented her body's struggle to cope with both the virus and the powerful antiretroviral medications she would now need for the rest of her life. Dr. Patricia Monroe, an expert in trauma psychology, provided compelling testimony about the unique psychological impact of discovering a partner's deliberate exposure to HIV. "This isn't simply about infidelity," she explained. "This is about a fundamental violation of human dignity, the conscious choice to risk someone's life in service of maintaining a secret relationship. The psychological impact is comparable to premeditated physical assault." The corporate dimension of the case expanded when internal emails revealed that several senior executives had been aware of Omari and Cameron's relationship, as well as Omari's HIV status. Their silence, motivated by fear of professional repercussions, had enabled the continuation of behavior that put others at risk. This evidence transformed the trial from a domestic tragedy into an indictment of corporate culture that prioritized power and discretion over human welfare. Perhaps the most damaging testimony came from Lisa Martinez, a junior executive who had briefly dated Omari before his marriage to Rylan. Her voice shook as she described how he had pursued her despite knowing his HIV status, stopping only when Cameron had insisted he find a more suitable public relationship. Her testimony suggested that Rylan had been specifically chosen as a socially acceptable partner who could provide cover for their ongoing relationship. The prosecution's attempts to maintain focus on the actual shooting became increasingly difficult as each day brought new revelations about the elaborate web of deception that had surrounded Rylan. Their argument that she should have pursued legal remedies began to ring hollow as evidence mounted of how thoroughly Omari had manipulated every aspect of their shared life. The weight of cumulative evidence began to shift the courtroom's atmosphere. Even the most stoic jurors showed visible reactions to testimony detailing how Omari had manipulated company resources to maintain his double life. Expense reports revealed patterns of business dinners that coincided with hotel reservations, conference trips that became romantic getaways, and corporate apartments maintained under the guise of temporary housing for visiting executives. A breakthrough moment came when the defense introduced surveillance footage from their neighborhood. The timestamps showed Omari and Cameron meeting in their marital home while Rylan worked late at the social services department. The footage of them entering the house she had made into a home, using the bed she slept in, brought a collective gasp from the courtroom. Raylan's composed facade cracked for the first time as she watched these strangers invade her private space on screen. The prosecution's case suffered another blow when they called Cameron's executive assistant to testify about office protocols. Under cross-examination, she broke down, revealing years of covering up not just the affair, but multiple instances where Cameron and Omari's behavior had put others at risk. She described being forced to reschedule meetings when either man had visible symptoms and managing their medication schedules during business trips. Dr. James Cooper, a respected epidemiologist, provided expert testimony about the psychological impact of HIV transmission within marriages. His research data showed alarming statistics about partners who knowingly exposed their spouses, painting a picture of a form of domestic violence that often went unrecognized by the legal system. His clinical description of the virus's long-term health implications made several jurors visibly uncomfortable. The defense team's masterstroke came when they presented a detailed financial analysis of the company's records. Forensic accountants had uncovered a pattern of promotions, bonuses, and special assignments that coincided with developments in Omari and Cameron's relationship. The evidence suggested that Raylan's husband had literally profited from maintaining their marriage as a cover, while actively endangering her health. Email threads between Omari and Cameron revealed discussions about Rylan that were particularly damning. They had coldly calculated the benefits of her profession, how her role as a social worker lent credibility to their public image, how her dedication to helping others made her less likely to question his frequent absences, how her trusting nature made her the perfect unwitting participant in their deception. The most devastating evidence emerged when the defense presented Omari's private text messages with Cameron discussing Raylan's potential HIV exposure. Their casual exchanges about managing the situation and keeping things quiet revealed a chilling indifference to her life. One particular message from Omari to Cameron read through court transcripts, discussing how Raylan's eventual diagnosis could be attributed to her work with high-risk populations and social services, drew audible reactions from the jury. Former colleagues from Omari's office provided testimony that painted a picture of systematic workplace exploitation. Junior employees described being pressured to maintain alibis, make restaurant reservations under false names, and handle personal errands that facilitated the affair. Their accounts revealed how corporate power had been wielded to ensure silence, with careers threatened and promotions promised in exchange for discretion. The prosecution's strategy began to falter as medical experts detailed the progression of Raylan's health decline. Laboratory reports tracked the steady deterioration of her immune system during the months when Omari had known his status but remained silent. The doctors explained how early intervention could have significantly improved her long-term prognosis, highlighting how his silence had directly compromised her medical care. A turning point came when the defense introduced Raylan's personal journals, documenting her growing awareness of physical symptoms she couldn't explain. Her entries revealed a woman desperately trying to maintain faith in her marriage while her body betrayed her with unexplained fatigue, persistent illness, and mounting health concerns. The contrast between her written worry for Omari's demanding work schedule and the reality of his activities during those hours created a powerful narrative of betrayal. Security footage from their gated community proved particularly damning. Compiled over months, it showed a pattern of late-night visits to their home by Cameron, often on evenings when Omari had told Raylan he was working late. The systematic nature of these visits, some occurring while she was attending evening counseling sessions with troubled youth, demonstrated the calculated nature of their deception. The corporate investigation expanded to reveal how company resources had been misused to facilitate the affair. Expense reports showed patterns of client meetings that coincided with luxury hotel bookings, conference registrations that masked romantic getaways, and corporate jet usage for personal rendezvous disguised as business travel. A forensic analysis of Omari's company laptop revealed dozens of email drafts never sent, private musings about his double life that painted a disturbing psychological portrait. In these unguarded moments, he described his marriage to Raylan as his perfect cover story, discussing how her reputation for compassion and integrity made her an ideal shield for his activities. The calculated nature of these private thoughts struck at the heart of the prosecution's argument that Raylan had options other than violence. The testimony of Dr. Rebecca Chun, a specialist in psychiatric trauma, provided crucial context for Raylan's mental state leading up to the shooting. She explained how the combination of life-altering medical diagnosis, profound betrayal, and the discovery of years-long calculated deception can create a psychological perfect storm. Her analysis showed how Raylan's professional training, rather than providing clarity, may have deepened the trauma by allowing her to fully comprehend the extent of the manipulation. Perhaps the most shocking revelation came from an unexpected source, Cameron's ex-wife. Though initially reluctant to testify, she ultimately provided devastating testimony about similar patterns of behavior during her marriage. She described how Cameron had previously orchestrated relationships with subordinates while maintaining a respectable public image, suggesting that Omari had been part of a larger pattern of predatory behavior within the corporate hierarchy. The prosecution's attempts to focus on the moment of the shooting became increasingly difficult as evidence mounted of the systematic destruction of Raylan's reality. Their argument that she should have pursued legal channels lost impact as financial records revealed how thoroughly Omari had integrated their assets with Cameron's business interests, effectively ensuring that any attempt to leave would have been legally and financially devastating. Medical experts testified about the long-term implications of delayed HIV treatment, explaining how Omari's silence had not only exposed Raylan to the virus, but had potentially compromised her future health outcomes. The detailed explanation of how early intervention could have altered her prognosis transformed the narrative from one of infidelity to one of calculated physical harm. The defense team's presentation of surveillance footage from Raylan's medical appointments proved particularly moving. The images showed her attending doctor's visits alone, visibly struggling with her declining health, while time-stamped photos from corporate credit cards showed Omari and Cameron dining at expensive restaurants or checking into luxury hotels on those same days. The prosecution's closing arguments attempted to refocus the jury on the fundamental issue of premeditated murder. The district attorney stood before them, his voice resonating with practiced authority as he reminded them that understanding a crime does not excuse it. He emphasized how Raylan's professional background should have guided her toward legal solutions rather than violence. But the defense's closing statement, delivered with quiet intensity by Sarah Davidson, wove together the threads of testimony into a tapestry of systematic destruction. She walked the jury through each layer of betrayal, the calculated choice of Raylan as a cover story, the deliberate endangerment of her health, the years of psychological manipulation, and the cold indifference to her future. What you've heard over these weeks, Davidson told the silent courtroom, is not simply a story of infidelity or betrayal. You've witnessed the systematic dismantling of a human being's entire reality. Every foundation of trust, every belief in love and loyalty, every assumption about health and safety, all deliberately destroyed in service of maintaining a lie. The jury's deliberations lasted 3 days, during which the courthouse buzzed with speculation. Media crews maintained their vigil on the courthouse steps, while legal experts debated possible outcomes on every major network. The case had captured national attention, sparking discussions about corporate ethics, HIV disclosure laws, and the psychology of betrayal. Inside the jury room, 12 citizens wrestled with questions that went beyond simple guilt or innocence. Their deliberations, later revealed through interviews, focused on the distinction between murder and crime of passion, the role of psychological trauma and criminal intent, and the broader implications of systematic betrayal. The atmosphere in the courtroom was electric when the jury finally returned. Rylan sat perfectly still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as the foreman stood to deliver their verdict. The seconds stretched like hours as he unfolded the paper containing their decision. The jury found Rylan guilty of second-degree murder, but with a strong recommendation for leniency based on extreme emotional distress and extenuating circumstances. Their decision acknowledged both the gravity of taking a life and the extraordinary circumstances that had led to that moment. The sentencing hearing brought forward yet another dimension of the case's complexity. Character witnesses from Raylan's professional life testified about her years of dedication to helping society's most vulnerable members. Former clients spoke tearfully about how she had helped them rebuild their lives, providing a stark contrast to the single violent act that had brought her before the court. Judge Eleanor Montgomery, known for her measured approach to complex cases, faced the difficult task of balancing justice with the extraordinary circumstances revealed during the trial. Her courtroom fell silent as she prepared to deliver the sentence, her expression grave as she considered the unprecedented nature of the case before her. "Ms. Marshall," the judge began, "this court has witnessed one of the most profound cases of systematic betrayal I've encountered in my 30 years on the bench. Your husband's actions, supported by Mr. Lattimore and enabled by corporate culture, represented a calculated assault on your physical and psychological well-being." The judge's sentencing statement acknowledged the unique factors that had led to the tragedy. She spoke about the intersection of corporate power, intimate betrayal, and the deliberate endangerment of health that had characterized the case. However, she also emphasized that the taking of a life demanded accountability. Rylan received a sentence of 20 years, with possibility of parole after 15. The judge's decision included mandatory counseling and the opportunity to participate in programs helping other inmates deal with trauma and betrayal. The sentence acknowledged both the severity of her actions and the extraordinary circumstances that had driven her to them. The aftermath of the trial sent shockwaves through multiple spheres of society. Corporate America faced renewed scrutiny over power dynamics and the protection of employees. HIV advocacy groups used the case to push for stricter disclosure laws and better protection for partners. Mental health professionals pointed to the case as an example of how systematic betrayal could destroy even the most stable individuals. Cameron Lattimore's carefully constructed world began to crumble in the wake of the trial. Shareholders demanded his resignation as multiple investigations into corporate misconduct began. Other employees came forward with similar stories of exploitation and coercion, suggesting a pattern of behavior that extended far beyond his relationship with Omari. The ripple effects of the case continued to spread long after the verdict. The corporate investigation into Cameron Lattimore's activities expanded beyond his relationship with Omari, revealing a deeply entrenched system of exploitation and abuse of power. Multiple executives stepped down as evidence emerged of their complicity in covering up not just this relationship, but numerous instances of corporate misconduct. Inside the Georgia Women's Correctional Facility, Rylan began the process of rebuilding her life within the confines of her new reality. Her background in social work proved both a blessing and a curse. While it helped her understand the system and adapt to prison life, it also meant she constantly encountered situations that reminded her of her former role helping others through crisis. Her case became a subject of study in law schools and psychology programs across the country. Academics and legal experts debated the intersection of betrayal trauma, public health law, and criminal justice that her story represented. The term Marshall syndrome began appearing in psychological literature, describing cases where systematic betrayal led to catastrophic psychological breakdown. Raylan's parents, their retirement savings depleted by legal fees, sold their home in South Carolina and moved closer to the prison. Their weekly visits became a testament to unconditional love, as they watched their daughter struggle to reconcile the person she had been with the actions that had defined her fate. Her mother's hands, once steady from years of teaching young children, now trembled as she pressed them against the visiting room glass. The medical implications of her HIV status added another layer of complexity to her incarceration. The prison system's healthcare provisions, already strained, had to accommodate her need for specialized medical care and consistent access to antiretroviral medications. Her case became a rallying point for prison reform advocates pushing for better healthcare for inmates with chronic conditions. Perhaps the most profound transformation occurred within Rylan herself. The woman who had once dedicated her life to helping others navigate trauma now faced the task of healing herself. Her prison journals, later published with her permission, revealed the complex journey of someone forced to confront the devastating consequences of both betrayal and her own violent response to it. Fellow inmates, initially wary of her professional background, gradually began seeking her counsel. Despite explicit instructions not to act in any therapeutic capacity, Rylan found herself becoming a quiet source of support for others struggling with their own histories of betrayal and trauma. The case's impact on legal reform became increasingly significant as lawmakers began examining the intersection of HIV disclosure laws and domestic violence statutes. Several states introduced martial laws, requiring stricter penalties for knowingly exposing partners to HIV and recognizing such actions as a form of domestic violence. The legal community started viewing deliberate HIV exposure within relationships as a form of assault rather than merely a health issue. Corporate America underwent its own reckoning in the wake of the trial. The detailed exposure of how company resources had been used to facilitate and conceal Omari and Cameron's relationship led to widespread policy reforms. Companies began implementing stricter oversight of executive conduct and establishing better protections for employees who reported misconduct. The term Lattimore Protocol emerged as shorthand for corporate policies specifically designed to prevent abuse of power in workplace relationships. Mental health professionals began developing new frameworks for understanding and treating betrayal trauma, particularly in cases involving deliberate health endangerment. The psychological impact of discovering a partner's conscious decision to risk one's life added a new dimension to existing trauma therapy models. Raylan's case became a cornerstone example in training programs for counselors and therapists working with survivors of intimate partner betrayal. Inside prison, Raylan's daily routine became a careful balance between surviving her present circumstances and processing her past. Her background in social work gave her unique insight into the system's rehabilitation programs, though she often found herself struggling with being on the receiving end of services she had once provided. The irony of her situation, a former helper now needing help, became a central theme in her personal journey. The HIV advocacy community found itself grappling with the complexities raised by her case. While condemning the violence of her response, many advocates pointed to her story as evidence of the devastating psychological impact of intentional HIV exposure and the need for better legal protections. Support groups for HIV-positive individuals began incorporating specific programs addressing betrayal trauma. Cameron Lattimore's downfall continued to unfold in the years following the trial. As investigations deepened, evidence emerged of a pattern of behavior spanning decades. Former employees came forward with stories of similar manipulation and coercion, revealing how corporate power had been wielded as a weapon of control and exploitation. The scandal ultimately led to criminal charges against multiple executives and a complete overhaul of the company's leadership structure. Through the sealed corridors of the Georgia Women's Correctional Facility, Raylan's presence began creating an unexpected ripple effect. Despite explicit prohibitions against practicing her former profession, her natural empathy and understanding of human behavior made her an unofficial source of wisdom for both inmates and staff. Her unique perspective, having crossed the line from helping professional to incarcerated individual, provided insights that traditional counselors couldn't match. The publication of her prison journals, titled Shattered Trust, The Price of Betrayal, became a controversial bestseller. Her raw, unflinching examination of how a dedicated professional crossed the line into violence resonated with readers worldwide. The book sparked intense debates about the limits of human endurance when faced with systematic betrayal and the fine line between victim and perpetrator. Medical researchers began studying what they termed the Marshall pattern, cases where HIV transmission within marriages led to severe psychological trauma. Their findings revealed an alarming frequency of cases where infected partners deliberately concealed their status, leading to calls for mandatory disclosure laws and better protection for vulnerable spouses. Raylan's parents, now living in a modest apartment near the prison, became advocates for families dealing with similar tragedies. Their support group for parents of incarcerated professionals grew into a national network, providing resources and understanding for those struggling to reconcile their children's past achievements with their current reality. The corporate world's initial shock over the case evolved into substantive change. Companies began implementing what became known as Marshall markers, warning signs of power abuse and relationship exploitation within corporate hierarchies. Human resource departments developed new protocols for handling situations where professional and personal relationships intersected. Inside the prison, Raylan's medical journey continued to highlight systemic issues in correctional healthcare. Her need for consistent HIV treatment and monitoring became a case study in the challenges faced by inmates with chronic conditions. Prison reform advocates used her situation to push for better medical care within the correctional system. Years into her sentence, Raylan began working with a prison writing program, helping other inmates articulate their own stories of trauma and transformation. Her groups became known for their raw honesty and healing impact, though she carefully maintained the line between peer support and professional counseling. The transformation within prison walls extended beyond Raylan's individual journey. Her presence forced the institution to confront the complexities of housing someone whose professional background provided unique insight into the system's shortcomings. Guards and administrators found themselves interacting with an inmate who understood institutional dynamics as well as they did, creating an unusual dynamic that challenged traditional power structures. Her case became a cornerstone study in criminal justice reform, particularly regarding defendants with professional backgrounds in human services. Legal scholars began examining how career expertise in helping professions might influence both criminal behavior and rehabilitation potential. The term helper syndrome emerged in legal literature, describing cases where professional caregivers crossed legal boundaries in response to profound personal trauma. 5 years into her sentence, Raylan's story attracted the attention of documentary filmmakers exploring the intersection of medical ethics, corporate responsibility, and criminal justice. Though she declined to appear on camera, her written statements about the systematic destruction of her life became powerful testimony about the hidden costs of corporate corruption and intimate betrayal. The medical community's response to her case continued to evolve. Healthcare providers began developing new protocols for handling suspected cases of deliberate HIV exposure within marriages. Training programs for medical professionals now included segments on recognizing signs of intentional health endangerment as a form of domestic abuse. Cameron Lattimore's eventual prosecution for corporate fraud and endangerment brought another wave of attention to Raylan's case. His trial revealed an even deeper pattern of manipulation, with evidence suggesting Omari hadn't been his first victim in a long history of exploiting subordinates. The corporate culture that had enabled their behavior came under intense scrutiny, leading to industry-wide reforms and executive oversight. Inside her cell, Raylan maintained a disciplined routine that reflected her professional background. She meticulously documented her experiences, creating what would later become valuable research material for studies on trauma, betrayal, and rehabilitation. Her detailed observations of prison life from both a professional and personal perspective offered unique insights into the correctional system. As she approached the halfway point of her sentence, Raylan began receiving letters from law students, psychology researchers, and ethics professors seeking her perspective on various aspects of her case. Her responses, carefully crafted to maintain appropriate boundaries while sharing valuable insights, became part of curriculum materials in multiple disciplines. The approach of her parole eligibility date created a new wave of public interest in Raylan's case. Legal advocates began preparing arguments highlighting her exemplary prison record, her positive influence on fellow inmates, and the extraordinary circumstances that had led to her crime. The question of whether society would benefit more from her continued incarceration or her potential return to helping professions sparked intense debate in legal and social service circles. Her medical journey in prison became increasingly significant as studies showed the long-term effects of delayed HIV treatment. Healthcare advocates used her case to demonstrate how domestic betrayal could have lifelong medical consequences, pushing for stronger legal protections for partners of HIV-positive individuals who knowingly concealed their status. The corporate world's response to the scandal continued to evolve. Major companies began implementing annual Marshall reviews, comprehensive audits designed to identify and prevent the kind of systemic abuse that had characterized Omari and Cameron's behavior. Executive training programs now included mandatory sessions on ethical relationships and health disclosure responsibilities. The sight of her father carefully organizing her medications each morning, her mother preparing meals modified for her health needs, demonstrated how profoundly her actions had altered not just her life, but her entire family's existence. Reintegration presented unique challenges given her notoriety. Job applications triggered immediate recognition. Housing searches became complicated when landlords Googled her name. Even routine tasks like grocery shopping could turn difficult when someone recognized her from news coverage or documentary features about her case. The fact that her story had become case study material in multiple professional fields meant that many people she encountered had studied her tragedy in an academic context. The HIV support community provided unexpected assistance in her transition. Support groups that had advocated for better protection laws based on her case now offered practical help with medical management and emotional support. Her status as both a cautionary tale and a catalyst for positive change created a complex dynamic within these organizations. The corporate world's interest in her insights presented both opportunities and ethical dilemmas. Companies wanted her perspective on preventing similar situations, but she struggled with how to share her experience without seeming to profit from tragedy. Each speaking invitation required careful consideration of how to balance education with responsibility. Shall I continue with more about her adjustment to freedom and her evolving role in society? Her role in society began to take shape in unexpected ways. Rather than returning to direct social work practice, Ryland found herself drawn to policy advocacy and education. Her unique perspective, as someone who had experienced multiple sides of systemic failure, provided valuable insight into how institutions could better protect vulnerable individuals. Speaking engagements evolved from simple cautionary tales into nuanced discussions of power dynamics, betrayal trauma, and institutional responsibility. The medical community's interest in her experience led to collaborations with healthcare providers developing protocols for handling suspected cases of deliberate HIV exposure. Her ability to articulate both the physical and psychological impact of such betrayal helped shape more comprehensive approaches to patient care. Treatment centers began incorporating her insights into their standard procedures for supporting newly diagnosed partners. Law enforcement agencies and legal education programs sought her input on recognizing signs of systematic betrayal before they escalated to violence. Her case had become a benchmark for understanding how professional training might actually intensify trauma responses rather than mitigate them. Police departments implemented new protocols for handling cases involving healthcare workers and social service professionals in crisis. Her parents' support group for families of incarcerated professionals expanded its scope under her guidance. The organization began addressing specific challenges faced by helpers who crossed legal boundaries, providing resources for families struggling to reconcile their loved ones' professional dedication with criminal actions. Their work highlighted the unique psychological burden carried by those who fall from positions of trust. Managing her public identity proved consistently challenging. While many viewed her as a symbol of institutional failure and the need for reform, others couldn't move past the violence of her actions. Every public appearance required careful consideration of how to acknowledge both the legitimacy of her insights and the gravity of her crime. The corporate reforms sparked by her case continued to evolve with her input. Companies implementing Marshall protocols sought her perspective on identifying subtle signs of power abuse and manipulation. Her ability to articulate how seemingly minor policy violations could enable systematic abuse helped strengthen corporate oversight mechanisms. Her personal evolution became as compelling as her public impact. Living with the dual burdens of her past actions and her HIV status required constant navigation of physical and emotional challenges. Each medical appointment served as a reminder of both Omari's betrayal and her violent response. Yet she found ways to transform these moments into opportunities for educating healthcare providers about the complex intersection of medical ethics and intimate partner betrayal. The publication of her second book, Beyond the Breaking Point, Rebuilding After Ultimate Betrayal, offered a raw examination of her journey from trusted professional to convicted murderer and back to contributing member of society. Unlike her prison journals, this work focused on the process of reconciling her violent actions with her fundamental identity as a helper. The book became required reading in many professional ethics courses. Her relationship with her parents continued to evolve in profound ways. Their unwavering support through her imprisonment had transformed into a complex partnership in advocacy work. Together, they presented at conferences about family resilience in the face of professional tragedy. Their story of maintaining bonds through unimaginable circumstances offered hope to other families navigating similar crises. The corporate world's ongoing interest in her story led to the development of comprehensive training programs addressing power dynamics in professional relationships. Companies began implementing annual Marshall assessments, detailed evaluations of institutional cultures, and potential abuse enablers. Her tragedy had literally changed how corporations approached responsibility for employee welfare. Her work with HIV support organizations took on new dimensions as medical advances changed the landscape of treatment. While her own health remained stable through careful management, she became a powerful advocate for maintaining focus on prevention and partner protection even as treatment options improved. Her story remained a stark reminder of the human cost of deliberate exposure. The legal community's continued examination of her case led to further refinements in how the justice system handles cases involving betrayal trauma. Courts began considering Marshall factors when evaluating cases where professional caregivers respond violently to systematic betrayal. Her experience helped shape more nuanced approaches to understanding criminal intent in trauma responses. Throughout all her public work and advocacy, Ryland never lost sight of the gravity of her actions. Her journey of reconciliation with having taken a life became an integral part of her message. She consistently emphasized that understanding the psychological impact of betrayal should inform prevention rather than justify violence. This delicate balance, acknowledging the depth of trauma while maintaining accountability for her response, gave her message unique credibility. The 10th anniversary of Omari's death brought renewed media attention to her story. Documentary filmmakers and journalists sought to examine the long-term implications of her case. The corporate reforms, legal changes, and medical protocols that had emerged from her tragedy had created lasting institutional changes. Yet she insisted that every interview include acknowledgement of the fundamental loss of life that had initiated these reforms. Her ongoing management of HIV became part of a larger narrative about the long-term impact of intimate partner betrayal. Medical researchers studied her case as an example of how delayed treatment due to deliberate concealment affected health outcomes. Her openness about her medical journey helped reduce stigma while highlighting the serious consequences of non-disclosure. Cameron Lattimore's death from AIDS-related complications during this period brought another wave of public attention. His final years had been marked by legal troubles and corporate disgrace as more victims of his predatory behavior came forward. The contrast between his unrepentant end and Raylan's journey of responsibility and redemption sparked new discussions about accountability and transformation. The support group she established for professional caregivers dealing with personal trauma grew into a national network. Healers Healing provided safe spaces for healthcare workers, social workers, and counselors to address their own psychological wounds without fear of professional consequences. Her insight into how helper training can complicate personal crisis response proved invaluable in developing support protocols. Her parents' dedication to advocacy work, despite their advancing age, inspired a foundation focused on supporting families affected by professional caregiver crimes. The Marshall Family Foundation provided resources for legal support, counseling, and education, helping others navigate the complex journey they had experienced firsthand. The ripple effects of Raylan's case continued to influence multiple sectors of society. Universities began incorporating her story into various curriculum streams, from medical ethics to corporate governance, from criminal justice to social work. Her experience became a crucial case study in understanding how institutional failures can intersect with personal trauma to create catastrophic outcomes. Professional licensing boards across multiple disciplines revised their protocols for identifying and supporting practitioners in crisis. The Marshall Indicators became standard reference points for supervisors monitoring staff wellness. These guidelines helped identify warning signs of severe personal trauma before they escalated to potential violence. Her work with HIV advocacy groups evolved to address emerging challenges in the field. As medical advances made the condition more manageable, she emphasized maintaining focus on the psychological impact of deliberate exposure. Her testimony proved crucial in maintaining strong disclosure laws even as treatment options improved. The corporate reforms sparked by her case reached international significance. Companies worldwide adopted variations of the Marshall Protocols for managing power dynamics and preventing abuse of authority. Her tragedy had fundamentally altered how organizations approached responsibility for employee welfare and relationship oversight. Legal scholars continued analyzing her case's implications for understanding criminal intent and trauma-induced violence. The term Marshall defense entered legal discourse, referring to cases where professional caregivers respond violently to systematic betrayal. While never justifying violence, this framework helped courts better understand the psychological context of such crimes. Her parents, now in their 80s, witnessed their daughter's tragedy transform into a force for positive change. Their small apartment became an informal museum of sorts, filled with documentation of the reforms and improvements their family's pain had sparked. Their continuing presence at advocacy events, despite their age, reminded everyone of the human cost behind the policy changes. The legacy of Ryland Marshall's case extends far beyond the immediate tragedy that captured national attention. What began as a devastating story of betrayal and violence transformed into a catalyst for fundamental changes across multiple institutions and professional fields. Her personal tragedy became a mirror reflecting deeper societal issues that had long gone unaddressed. The corporate world would never be the same after the Marshall case. What started as one company's scandal evolved into global reforms in how organizations handle power dynamics and relationship oversight. The Marshall Protocols implemented worldwide now protect countless employees from the kind of systematic exploitation that destroyed her life. Companies routinely conduct Marshall audits to identify and prevent abuse of authority, while executive training programs emphasize the devastating consequences of ethical breaches. In healthcare, her case revolutionized approaches to HIV disclosure and partner protection. Medical institutions worldwide now implement strict protocols for handling suspected cases of deliberate exposure. The psychological impact of health-related betrayal, once overlooked, became central to patient care protocols. Treatment centers specifically address the trauma of diagnosis through deception, understanding that the emotional wounds can be as devastating as the physical illness. The legal system's understanding of trauma-induced violence evolved significantly through examination of her case. Courts now consider the Marshall factors when evaluating cases involving professional caregivers who respond violently to systematic betrayal. While never excusing violence, this framework helps justice systems better understand the complex psychology behind such tragic responses. Professional licensing boards across multiple fields implemented the Marshall Indicators, early warning signs that help identify practitioners in crisis before tragedy strikes. Supervisor training now includes specific protocols for supporting staff members facing personal trauma, recognizing that professional expertise in helping others can sometimes complicate personal crisis response. Her parents' dedication to advocacy work spawned international support networks for families navigating similar crises. The Marshall Family Foundation continues their legacy, providing resources and hope to those affected by professional caregiver crimes. Their journey from devastated parents to agents of change demonstrates how even the deepest pain can fuel positive transformation. Yet perhaps Raylan's most profound impact lies in how her story continues to influence future generations of professionals. Universities worldwide use her case to teach about ethics, power dynamics, and institutional responsibility. Medical schools, law programs, and social work departments analyze different aspects of her tragedy to prevent similar situations from developing. But behind every policy change, every reform, every new protocol lies the fundamental human cost of her story. A life was lost. A dedicated helper became a perpetrator of violence. A family was shattered. These harsh realities remind us that institutional failures can have devastating personal consequences. Thank you for joining us for this exploration of one of the most complex and impactful cases in recent history. Remember to subscribe to True Crime Stories Archive for more in-depth examinations of cases that change society. Share your thoughts in the comments below about how institutions can better protect individuals from systematic betrayal. The Ryland Marshall story reminds us that sometimes the deepest betrayals come from those closest to us, and that trust, once shattered, can have devastating consequences. It teaches us that while we cannot always prevent betrayal, we can work to create systems that protect the vulnerable and support those in crisis. What would you have done in Raylan's position? How can society better protect individuals from systematic betrayal? Join the discussion below and help continue the conversation about this landmark case that forever changed how we view trust, betrayal, and institutional responsibility.